The four folks with me today are on the front lines of the battlefield because, as we know, it's a very volatile job market right now, although in many cases, people who came back from their internships and converted those internships to full-time offers, they're in pretty good shape. Very few of those types of companies, particularly in consulting or banking, I believe, we're going to find out, have rescinded any offers. Where it gets a little more sensitive is if you're late to the game and you don't already have an offer that you've accepted, or you may have an internship that could be canceled or made virtual, which is less desirable, of course. Or if you're an international student, I would imagine this is a very tough job market to graduate into, particularly if you want a job in the United States. So let me introduce everyone first, and we'll go from there. We have Colette, who is on the upper left part of our Brady Bunch screen, who is from University of Washington's Foster School. Yeah. Heavy duty tech there. 60% of the graduates go into technology. We have under her Regina Regazzi, and Regina is at the Parker Career Center at UCLA's Anderson School, which also is pretty tech heavy. About 30% of the students went into tech, and about, about 20% went into consulting last year, 15% in the finance, which is surprisingly low for UCLA, which years ago used to be considered more of a finance school. We have Abigail Kies under her, and Abigail is at Yale. Obviously, consulting and finance are very big. Consulting had 37% of the people went into consulting. Those are good, high-paying jobs. I have always said that if I were an MBA, I'd go into consulting because I consider it almost a postgraduate degree in and of itself, particularly if you go to MBB. And in finance, you sent 24% of your class into finance, and that's pretty much historically where Yale typically is, very strong finance group. And then we have Abby Scott. So we kind of have two Abbies here, Abigail and Abby. And Abby Scott is from nearby, only a half hour away from me in Berkeley at the Haas School. Yes, indeed. Lovely place and a great school, obviously. And Berkeley is pretty well distributed there, like 33%, 33% in tech, 25% in consulting, 15% in finance. So welcome, everybody. Okay, so I said you're on the hot seat, and of course you're on the hot seat. Let's just give a little taste of what it's like right now in the MBA job market. And I know a lot of this is uncertain and still playing out and will play out until the very end. And really our audience is full of applicants and they're more interested in what's going to happen if they go now and come out 2 years from now, where we all think is going to be a great job market for those MBAs. So Colette, how about you? Why don't you start?
Yeah, so well, we think that all fields are looking for talent. In technology is hiring. We are at the epicenter of technology. We have Amazon continuing to hire. We've had about 3 to 4 students hired in the last week, and they continue to look at our interns. We are in their backyard. That's super helpful. We're, part of the ecosystem of technology here. Also, Seattle is the central hub for cloud computing. And so we also have Azure at Microsoft and AWS at Amazon. And so again, we have hiring happening in the tech field and certainly with the cloud. Digital marketing continues to take off and expand. Lululemon was just at our virtual career fair last week, and they're building a larger presence here. Digital marketing is really where it's happening for them. And then obviously, as you mentioned, healthcare is growing, and consulting firms continue to have a growing presence here in Seattle because Seattle's been one of the fastest growing cities in the country in the last 5 to 10 years. And so we continue to have a growing presence of all kinds of consulting firms.
So it may rain a lot in Seattle, but there are no storm clouds in your forecast.
Not with my rose-colored glasses, perhaps, but I really think that it's still really
really good.
clicking along.
That's
Mhm.
great to hear. And, and I think firms like Microsoft and Amazon, they're in very good shape through this
Yeah,
crisis.
yeah,
And the other thing that you didn't talk about, but I think is very true, is that those firms have an ecosystem around them in the Seattle area with a
right.
lot of early stage companies, a lot of startups, a lot of activity in the tech field as well. And I think that probably helped to contribute to your 98% placement rate 3
Absolutely.
months after graduation last year.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so Regina, what's it look like at UCLA? You're heavy on tech as well. You got a very strong tech environment around you. A lot of people come to UCLA because they love media and entertainment, even though not that many people actually place in that field. But what's it look like this year for you?
Well, I think one of the important things to say is that for our class of 2020, we haven't had any rescinds. So I think that's really good
That's
news. Yeah, there have been rescinds in the 2021 class, in the internship class.
sure.
And I think a couple of companies jumped quickly on that because they just assumed they couldn't make it happen, and not really seeing that the ecosystem around them was trying to figure out how to make it happen. And that was the thing to do. I was really surprised at the great response from banking and consulting and how supportive they have been
Mhm.
of their students with offers, both on the internship side as well as on the full-time side. The banks have all said you're all employed. Some of them have even gone straight to offer, as have some of the consulting firms, where they said, we're going to give you this shorter time frame of an internship. It's going to be a little bit more exploratory, learn what this business is all about, but we look forward to hiring you next year. So I think that's really good. Some of those firms have also decided to push out the start date of the full times. So I think it remains to be seen exactly what ends up happening there. But for right now, that's good news. Tech does keep hiring, as Colette had said. So we've seen that, but I think it's slower. And certainly entertainment and real estate just put the skids on very quickly.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're in hiring freezes. So I think those students are feeling a little bit more tense about actually finding an opportunity that's going to work for them. I think one of the things I like to say to interns is just keep in mind that the goal here is to get 3 solid bullet points on your resume for your summer internship. At the end of the day, that's the goal. And there are different ways to do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to take the form of a 10 or a 12-week internship. So I think it's just important to think about that for a moment. I think some of these companies are still in a wait and see mode. It's going to be a month or two before they figure out whether they're going to begin to hire again, and then how many people. And I think you see that with some of these smaller industries like the real estate, like entertainment, and like energy. A lot of the healthcare that we had seen had already done its recruiting. So we'll see how that pops up on the MBA scene. Like, will we see it in biotech? Will we see more hiring?
Mhm.
We have seen a little bit. Will we see more in med devices or other areas of like health tech, which seems to be a big burgeoning area for MBAs?
Right. Yeah, that which we should say, it's like a tale of two cities, like Dickens wrote. If you want a job in entertainment, in travel, in leisure, in retail, in restaurants, forget about it. Okay, put it on hold. Go to Deloitte, go to Accenture, go to MBB, do whatever you got to do. Give yourself a little time to work it out, or work in their practice
That's right.
as opposed to in that industry. In a year or two, you come out, you can do whatever you want, right?
That's right.
Abigail, Yale is not far from the United States epicenter of the pandemic, New York City, which is frightening to me, having been, I'm a New York transplant to California 11 years ago. And I'm filled with sorrow over the pain and the tragedy that city is facing now. But I don't know that it's impacting you, although I think a lot of Yale MBAs do get hired in New York City.
Yes, a lot of our students do stay in the tri-state area, as well as go a lot of other places around the globe. But it's definitely having, I think it's having an impact. One of the things that, hiring has continued, and I'd echo a lot of what you said. On the full-time side, it's definitely slowed down significantly, we always have students looking this time of year because of the choices that they make. We have a large number of students who go into the large consulting firms or banks. We also have a large number of students who choose things that are more niche, that may only hire 1 or 2 MBAs in any given year, if that. And so that hiring almost always happens this time of year. And that's still happening, and people are still getting offers daily on both the internship and full-time side. It is happening a little bit slower though. And I think part of the slowness has less to do with the market and more to do with just the environment that we're living in. One of the things that I've had multiple conversations with students about is making sure, especially as they are interviewing virtually, to connect with people, that everybody's living through this very bizarre experiment that we're participating in and forced into. And that especially for jobs that are in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, that it's important to really connect, that people have other things that are very pressing in their lives, and really, people that they love who are not in good shape. And so I think that has been a very constant piece of everything that we've been doing. The good side is that students continue to get offers and it's hard. I'm not going to minimize the amount of work that's going into it on the students' part. Our alumni have completely risen to the occasion and have been reaching out to students, as well as being very receptive when students reach out to them, and really doing a huge part to make sure that students continue to find the opportunities that they really want. But that doesn't minimize the really the difficult situation that both the people hiring as well as the students are in as they're navigating all these, what even 4 or 5 months ago was a networking conversation and people had some idea of what to expect. People have no idea what to expect. And I think that that's really having a big impact just in terms of how the process looks as well.
Yeah. And I might say, because this may be apparent to a lot of people who are applicants and maybe less apparent to others, that to me, the secret sauce of an MBA and a business school is your function. There is no other department, no other school.
We agree.
No other place in the academy, in any university, that has its act together like business schools do in terms of career management, professional development, and I'll even use the word that no one wants to use anymore, placement. There's just nobody that even comes close. So, you can talk about a difficult job market, but I'm going to tell you, if you're coming out of a graduate program, you want to come out of a business graduate program. And it's not just the fact that people are there working really hard for you, side by side with you. It's the alumni who those networks and those connections really prove invaluable when things get tough. Absolutely. So Abby, at Berkeley, how are things in this market? You're obviously in a big Bay Area tech market, but impacted as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think my colleagues have done a great job speaking to market conditions. Very similar experience that we're having at Berkeley Haas. I wanted to pick up, John, on what you were just saying about just being a good time to be in business school. I just wanted to give listeners a window into sort of what's happening on campus more broadly with a career lens. So all of our schools flipped almost overnight to a pretty darn good virtual learning experience. And what we saw in the career world is we did the same. So all of the meetings with students went to virtual one-on-one appointments very successfully. And I know everybody's would echo that. We all put together new content also to address this sort of bizarre time that we're in. Things, obviously things like virtual interviewing and how to be successful networking in these challenging times, but just also pulling in graduates. We were talking earlier about panels of alums who had been through an experience, certainly not like this, but a previous recession, and just bringing their voice into the building. So I think what you were saying earlier, John, about this is a great time to be in business school, not only because of the support structure that's in place, but this is a relationship-based job search that's required right now. And what better place to be than in a deeply connected community of peers, of alumni, of professors, of people who really have your back. So all things considered, you know, I don't want to downplay this difficult market. It's tough, but I think being an MBA student right now is a pretty good place to be.
Now, 2 of her 4 panelists had been through the previous meltdown in 2008, 2009. And I'm wondering, and those are our 2 Abbies. Although Abigail, I don't know if you go by Abby, do you?
Not very much.
So we have an Abigail, we have an Abby.
And I definitely don't go by Abigail, so this is good.
Okay, there you go. So, and incidentally, I have a daughter whose name is Abigail, but we call her Abby. So there you go. So, what is this downturn similar to what you saw back in 2009, or is it different? And in the webinars you recently held with MBAs who had to navigate their way through that other difficult time, what were the learnings that came out of it? Abigail?
So, I mean, what I think is particularly different is the overarching reason for this downturn being a health concern that is, first of all, worldwide, and second of all, it has completely stagnated everything from, you know, the local coffee shop to large businesses and everything in between. I think in many ways, large businesses are continuing more in many ways than a lot of smaller businesses, just because of the dynamics and how they operate anyway, and their global interconnectivity and how much they're doing virtually in regular times. They're just doing so much more of that. But I think that the echoing what Abby was talking about before, the networking and the relationship piece is so different this time. And it's so different from how most students and most on the receiving end, most employers and alumni are used to building these relationships. And I think that the uncertainty also is very different right now. The uncertainty in 2008, 2009 was about economics. And I would say it wasn't even necessarily the same kind of uncertainty. It was, this is a terrible situation, this is where we are. And there was not the same, it sort of went in waves as it affected different industries, much more than just hitting everything all at once. And it also was very, people's lives went on. People's lives, you know, it wasn't like everything else in life was suddenly stopped. And I think that that reality that we're all living in everywhere around the world right now is very different. And I think on the good side, that hiring has continued much more now than it did then. And I think economic activity in many ways has continued much more, you know, in a much more quote unquote normal way than it did then. And so, I mean, this was not, I mean, in terms of I have a sort of guarded optimism about our graduating class, because so far they're doing very well and they're putting a lot of work in, and they're working, you know, and it's not to minimize the effort it's taking, but they continue to get jobs, and they're tracking very closely to, you know, or ahead of where sometimes where we were last year or prior years. Mm-hmm. I think that there are a lot of great opportunities that they're still finding and that are still available to them. Yes, some start dates are changing a little bit and might be a little bit later than students would prefer, but those offers are still solid in ways that, you know, 12 years ago, they were drying up or they were disappearing and much more often. So I think in that way, it's very different. In terms of lessons, though, from people who lived through it, a lot of it's about resiliency. A lot of it's about sort of looking at what did they learn, or what did being in a difficult job market force them to ask themselves about what was important to them, and how they really, if it was going to take effort, what did they want to put that effort toward, and what was worth it for them, knowing that they could be successful, but it might take more work. So what was worth that work, and how could they really use the sort of forced difficulty of the situation to their advantage, and ultimately to really contribute to their longer term success.
Right. And Abby, out of your webinar that you did the other day with people who survived the economic implosion, which was mainly finance driven back in 2008, 2009, what were the key learnings from that?
Yeah, I think the thing that I really took away from being reminded of their stories was that it was just a blip in the radar. Like, we're living it right now, and it is super intense and feels like there will be long-term impacts. But from a career perspective, It didn't really matter was the key takeaway. Yes, they hustled to find those first jobs. Yes, a couple of the 4 took something really that was not what they thought they were going to have to do coming out of business school, but it was a stepping stone and it led them to where they wanted to be today. And by the way, we didn't like select these people because they'd had terrific career trajectories. We just kind of randomly picked 4 people. I think we put this together in a week. And certainly every single one of them told a story, you know, as was touched on, of resilience and that sort of thing, but really more of successful career trajectory that happened, maybe even as a result of this, and how strong their network and community was, and what a big part that played in their success.
Right. Yeah. That is crucial to the market. Definitely is. So let's zoom ahead because there are applicants now who have just applied. Maybe they've taken advantage of an extended round and might be starting in the fall. More likely than not, there are people who will in fact apply in the next application round or cycle. And they're going to face a very different market than the one that MBAs are facing this spring and summer. What does a normal market look like, Colette?
The normal market, okay. Well, typically we'll have companies come to campus, and if this is what you mean, companies come to campus and present what their career opportunities are in the fall for full-time hiring, and then in the typically in the winter for internship hiring. We have heard from companies who have said, we would like to come back in the fall. Could you tell us, you know, when is your calendar opening up? So we have really great indicators that our companies will be back, and they're planning longer term to come and recruit at Foster. I would anticipate consulting firms and our technology firms will all be on campus, and that we will continue to be delivering the ROI we've delivered in the past to our MBAs. It's a safe harbor in the storm while there's this uncertainty that we're observing around us.
Exactly, which is why MBA applications tend to be counter-cyclical. They typically go up. Many people are predicting quite a competitive admission season in the next cycle. And I think their companies will have a lot of open arms in 2 years for these candidates. Regina, has what MBAs expect and want from a career changed in the years that you've been involved in career development and management?
A little bit. What we've seen is that students these days are questioning whether the hard charging 80 to 100-hour weeks are worth the money that they offer. And they're starting to think a lot more about lifestyle and what's important to them as people, what's important to what they're thinking about, like with a family situation and things like that. So I think people are asking a lot more questions about, what do I want holistically out of my work, keeping in mind that I may have to balance the monetary gains, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of that. So people want to find fulfillment. We're hearing a lot about people who want to give back. So what we have to do in the beginning then is translate, does that mean that you're going to go for a nonprofit job? Or does it mean you're going to find ways to find fulfillment within anything you do? And I think a lot of companies, when we visit them on days on the job, or if there are career nights, things like that, they'll talk about how the students can give back once they come to work there. And I think that's really important, because I think students are placing a lot of value on that. So I would say that's an area where we're seeing some changes.
Right. Abigail, is that true at Yale as well?
It is. I think that's something that is definitely it's ingrained in the Yale culture anyway. It's definitely something that makes working at Yale unique, and really, I enjoy, because our students really have that question no matter what they're going into. What am I doing this for? What is it really forwarding? How am I contributing to something broader? And they are thinking that and asking themselves that, whether they are going into nonprofits or going into investment banking and everything in between. And I think I would say it's more that students are our students have always had a very broad range of what they're interested in and how they're using it. And I think, if anything, I feel like they're actually trying to connect those things more. So for instance, lately, just in the past few weeks, there have been more students interested in different kinds of, which is something we've had interest in before, but it's definitely grown in ed tech and education technology, and sort of looking at the different bridges. Certainly, healthcare is something that we have a lot of joint degrees and have a lot of students who are interested in always, but I think also asking different kinds and why are they doing it? And are they doing it just because it's their background, or are they doing it really because there's some piece of it that they think is really going to be where they want to make their contribution? And so I think that continues to evolve. But for us, I think that piece of it has always been something that's very ingrained in a lot of the culture of Yale, throughout the academics, as well as the student activities, as well as their career choices.
Right. And, the questions are starting to accumulate, and we're going to get to as many as we can in the latter part of the session here. But Emily asked a question that's kind of a good segue from what you just said, Abigail. She's wondering, given the current circumstances, do you foresee COVID-19 impacting social impact offerings, both opportunities at jobs and the curriculum at your schools? Abby, why don't you take that?
Yeah, so social impact is such a big category.
It really is.
And I think my colleagues here touched on it in the response to your last question. So I think what we're seeing on our campus as well is that students are looking for meaningful work and a way to make an impact, and that is social impact. We have always been a school where we've attracted a lot of students who are interested in this. And do I think it's going to change? I think that it's a generational question rather than a time and society question. I think our generation that's entering business school is going to demand this, and they want that sort of transparency with their company. It doesn't have to be the job is a social impact job, but I think they want to see that the company is playing a meaningful role in society. And I think companies are wisely trying to connect with that. So do I see that going up? Maybe, but I think it's already pretty high.
Yeah. It's a generational concern and a need almost, right, to connect one's life to a more purposeful endeavor of one kind or another. I wanted to ask Regina and Abby about something that many applicants will see and wonder about, and that is this. When you look at the employment stats at graduation and 3 months after for the best California schools, and we're talking York 2 plus Stanford, they tend to lag the similar stats at almost all other business schools. And now I've had a couple of ideas about this. I think one, there's a self-confidence with your graduates that makes them very choosy and selective. Another thing is the fact that a lot of people are looking, particularly on the West Coast, for startup opportunities and for early stage opportunities or venture capital firms. And we all know that those firms are not mainstream MBA recruiters. They don't recruit early. They don't have a set schedule. They're onesie twosie kinds of jobs that are brought in. They're not in the dozens or hundreds even. And I think that that's the reason why, the California schools with employment stats, if you just look at them, you don't know what's going on. And they don't look as impressive. Now, Regina, what do you say about that?
Because you see me laughing up here because I live this every day.
Of course.
The California effect. Yeah, we know.
Or is it
about
just California and that, everyone wants to just lay under a palm tree on a beach?
No, don't say that. I'm always like, no palm trees in the booklets. Well, so John, we've got a double issue down here in LA because people come to LA because they want to be in LA, right?
Yeah.
And even for the students who say, oh, can I get back to New York if I come to UCLA? And we always insist that yes, you can. Once they get here, they're like, it's kind of nice here. This is a nice
really
place
true.
to live. And we've had students over the past few years with terrific like product management jobs at major Silicon Valley tech firms turn them down, turn that $135,000 base salary down so that they can stay in LA. And that has been a challenge because in addition to just these startups not being ready to use MBAs, I think in some cases they don't know how to do so unless it is an MBA running the place. The other thing is they don't know enough about how to pay them competitively. So when you're talking about compensation that's in the high 20s, mid 30s, 130s, just for base salaries, find me a startup before they've gotten any funding who can afford that. And
That's
so
true.
you do run into that. And I think you're right. Like these students come in and they want to hold out for the perfect job. And I think everybody on here would agree with me when I say one of the big messages we try to tell students early on is you might not go from A to Z immediately. You might have to meander and pivot along the way so that you've got the right roles that are that stepping stone. And so I think that's what we try to do in our career series and whatnot is to really push that. Think about which job is right for right now. And I go back to this idea of the 3 solid bullet points on your resume. And I think that's especially true right now as we face a job market that may have slowed down a little bit. What can you take right now? Maybe you can work with a company on a project basis for something that will move you in the right direction. So I think those are a few of the things that we see and we're thinking about on that front.
Yeah. And Abby, do you have a perspective on this as well? Is it the
Yeah.
California disease? Like people come here and they can't leave and they don't want to leave, and therefore they're restricting their job searches. Is that part of it?
Oh, that's definitely part of it. And it's funny. I don't actually think of it as a big issue. I think it is a reality that some of the students that come to school in California are looking potentially at different industries. You mentioned startups; those jobs come up later. Sort of the whole non-traditional MBA industry. If you're looking at this metric, it's almost penalizing that group of companies. And I think that students should have the time to pursue what they want. I mean, we all of us offer lots of career services to our alumni. They know that. So, if they can figure out how to keep looking for the right job and pay their rent through the summer and maybe go on a trip and come back and pick it up in September, then let them do it. We don't actually find that the students that are looking for jobs 3 months after graduation are dissatisfied. They're actually choosing for the most part to be in that place. So yeah. I don't think of it as an issue.
Yep. Now, Colette, I'm gonna toss to you a wonderful softball question.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, this is from Marcos, and Marcos asked, "What skills are most valued by recruiters of interns, and do the skills differ when they hire for full-time jobs?"
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say that all of our MBAs are smart. Anyone who wants to get an MBA, they're smart already. They are now looking at relationship building skills and influence skills, decision-making skills, analytical skills. And the skills are built during the internship. Typically, I would say about 40% of our interns convert to full-time after their internship And if I understand his question correctly, is there a different set of criteria for full-time? I would argue that the skill sets that they're looking for are common across. They want to know, can you navigate ambiguity? Can you build relationships? Can you make decisions and communicate complex information and make it simple? So that's often what is part of an MBA program, not just the hard skills, but also some of the softer skills around these things.
Right. And in fact, you still hear people saying soft skills, soft skills, right? I mean, and schools have invested so much effort in the last quarter of a century on soft skills.
Yeah.
And yet, you ask corporate recruiters what they still want more of, and it's that. Which is mystifying to me, because the schools have gone way overboard in a good way. I'm not saying a bad way, but they're doing everything they possibly can and then some. And still, when you talk to recruiters, they're saying, "Oh, we wish the soft skills were even better."
Right,
I don't get it. I really don't get that part.
I think some of our students, one MBA told me that he thought when he got to campus, if he worked really hard and he focused on his coursework, he would be somehow plucked from the classroom and be offered a job. And he learned that the influence and relationship building skills, the networking skills were critical. It may have also been a cultural kind of issue too, coming from overseas. But having said that, we really do focus formally and informally on our soft skills, leadership courses, and then informally on things like just how to network and workshops on how to tell, be conversational, tell me about yourself. And we also shut down our campus, or at least the classes, for about 1 week in the winter quarter. And this is where we have teams of MBAs span out to different companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, T-Mobile, and they work on a real business problem. They have 48 hours to do this, and it's a sprint based on design thinking mindsets that we've introduced, and that's something that we feel helps students learn strategy and team building, but also some of these relational skills and soft skills in a real environment, in a real business world environment.
And I should point out the skills that you teach in terms of networking, relationship building, and how to maintain those networks are lifetime skills. These are not just skills that you get to get your first post-MBA job. These are skills you take with you through your entire career and will play a very important role in your ability to move from one organization to another and to enhance your responsibilities and the fulfillment you have for your job.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Abigail, I want to ask you this. There are some people who go into MBA programs who really don't know what they want to do, despite what they tell admissions to get admitted.
No.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective, who are the most successful in getting the job that they really want? Are they the people who come in directed, they have a target in mind, and they're already preparing themselves for that target? Or are they people who are still exploring? Who has the advantage in getting the job they really want?
I think both. I don't think that's what actually distinguishes what makes someone successful in the job search. I think that if someone comes in and they know exactly what they want to do and what job they want for that summer internship as well as for post-graduation, they still need to be putting the work in. And some people come in and think, oh, I already know what I want to do. I'm just going to go along this path. And that sometimes can trip people up, because even when things are very structured, or even when they have someone comes in with a very clear idea of where they want to go, they're still at school to learn, and there's so much to learn and so much to absorb. And as they are interviewing and as they're going through the process, part of what people are expecting in the networking phase as well as the interview phase is to incorporate all of that learning and to really be fluid and be able to absorb it. And that's a lot of what makes our MBAs stand out, is that ability to, stay on that path and also incorporate everything new that you're learning, and also keep asking yourself, what works, what doesn't, is this really what I want? And to get clearer and clearer about why it is. So even if you start out clear, you still need to continually really reinforce that to be successful, I think, in really building those relationships with alumni, building relationships with employers, and through the process. And I think that ability also translates to people who start out saying, I have no idea what I want to do. Or when I wrote my application, I absolutely believed what I wrote. And quite frankly, I was there when I applied over 20 years ago to business school. I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. And then for reasons over the summer, that totally changed. And I was like, why am I here? What am I doing? So I've lived that. And I know that people sometimes do it in fullest integrity, that when they do their application, they absolutely believe what they're writing, and then things change. And I encourage students to listen to that. Things change. That's part of what an education is. That's the kind of curious individuals we want at Yale. Those are the people that we want to be working with. And I think that people who are willing to ask themselves the questions and really dive deep and explore, ask themselves as they're sitting in classes, oh, wow, I never expected to like this operations class. Maybe I should look into what other kinds of careers does this apply to? Or how do I put this together with some other interest I have? They're also going to be successful. But I think what makes them successful isn't that they're coming in knowing what they wanted or not knowing. I think it's bringing that curiosity and that learning mindset so they can apply what they're learning, not just in an academic way, but in a holistic, really career-focused way, not just for now. And it's not about a search. It's really that lifelong curiosity and that lifelong learning, which in many ways is what will have people want to make the connections and continue to learn and grow as they're in their new employers as well.
That's great. And Abby, what's your best advice for an incoming MBA to make the best of the experience to get the job they really want?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that we encourage students to be focused is just because there are not enough hours in the day to participate in all the different things offered on all of our campuses. So we talk to students about having a career hypothesis, which is, sometimes called your plan A, and to really try to explore that, really with that open-minded curiosity that Abigail spoke to. Just to clear your calendar, really, because you can't possibly go to 3 things at once. And so being flexible, though, I think is really tested for the first time in some of our new students, because listening to what they're learning as they explore and being able to adapt their plan according to the feedback they're getting from the system and from themselves is really critical to navigating this journey. And it really is a journey. So, I think it's great to come in with a strong plan, a hypothesis, but be open and think also about what is sort of your plan B, that stepping stone job, which we've learned and we've all spoken to today, is not such a bad option. It's going to get you where you're trying to go long term. And really, when you're thinking about an MBA, it is a long-term value proposition, right? This is not just flipping to your next job. Quite often it does that for you, but really it's a long-term proposition.
Right. Now, Colette, there's a follow-up question to a comment that you made earlier. It's from Ram in Modesto, California. And he says, when you say that MBA applicants are smart, or meaning that's a skill that recruiters want, what do you precisely mean by that? Is there an objective definition of smartness as implied EQ or IQ, or is it something subjective?
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see. They obviously have a Gmat, but they've performed well in school with their GPA, but they've also written articulate essays on how to get to business school. They have recommendations that speak to their abilities. And so we are able to offer a class that I can say objectively, they're all very, very smart. And we're here to help them navigate their career and determine what speaks to them as they are exposed to different things in the business school. And we have a lot of different ways we do that. We have an online course that we offer students. We have a professional development week. It's a week of orientation. And there we do self-assessments like strength finders. We do a design your life workshop for them. And then we also take them out to companies. So I want to get back to what does SMART mean. I think one of the great advantages to going to business school is that you're with other smart people and you're interacting with them, you're debating, you're having discussions, you're pulling together for something called, we have C4C, it's a how do you explain that, California schools? It's where we come together and we celebrate. We're fundraising.
We're supporting, right?
Yeah.
Fundraising, athletic competition. It's also philanthropic hours.
Right. For special Olympics, I believe, things
and
like
others,
that. Yeah. And we all meet at Stanford for that event. And anyway, it's students pulling together. They're smart students. They're smart in the classroom, and they also enjoy each other.
Now, I know none of you have a crystal ball. And maybe you don't really want to forecast on this. I'm happy to forecast, but let's say we know that internationals who want to stay in the United States have had a difficult time of late, in part because the H-1B situation has been quite uncertain. And then all the anti-immigration rhetoric that's come out of the United States in the past 2.5, 3 years has scared off a lot of internationals or made them more worried. And I think it's actually had an impact on the job market to some extent. But 2 years from now, for an international graduate coming out of a US MBA program, what do you think their chances of landing a job in the US are going to be, given all the programs that now have STEM options, given the fact, and I'm going to be political here, cross my fingers and say this administration is gone. Now, what do you think the prospects are going to look like, Regina?
I think it's really hard to say. You mentioned briefly here the STEM certification.
Yeah.
I actually think that one is important.
Yes.
I know Abby has that, right? And we
Both of us.
just got that. Yale has that
We
too.
are also moving towards this MBA STEM certification.
Okay. So for any of the prospective students online, if they don't know what that means 3 years of OPT. And that allows you to work in the US without having to get that H-1B immediately and running the risks with the lottery. That helps a lot. So I think that could change things. But I do think we also have to inform companies about what that means, because it's somewhat new for some schools. So I think some of them are still coming up the learning curve on what that means.
That's true.
Yeah, so there's that. I really don't know. I think it has been tough. I think technology has been really good to students coming from international backgrounds. And it could be a bunch of functions within technology. I think people forget that. They think the whole IT background, I was an engineer and I'm going into engineering roles, but these roles are so diverse. So you've got everything from product management, which is a traditional role, but also product marketing, you've got operations, you've got finance, strategy. So all of these different backgrounds can play well within that industry, and any industry where they're kind to internationals. I would say that's probably one of the most open ones right now. I think we may see a little bit more in healthcare, depending on what healthcare is actually looking for from MBAs. And I think that sort of remains to be seen, because while healthcare may expand, the question is, are the roles that will expand all MBA roles? And I think many of them are not. So there's that as well. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity with people from these great backgrounds and what the perspectives that they can bring to the table. But I can't actually predict exactly what it'll be.
Yeah. Abigail, what's your outlook for the international MBA graduate in 2 years?
I'm a little more optimistic. I think, I also think that for international students, it is a challenging market right now, but it's not an impossible market. And I think one of the things that we found really fascinating with our 2019 grads, and we're tracking, hopefully it'll end up somewhere close to this is that they do very, very, very well, if not, the same or better in many cases than our US students. And I think what that doesn't say is how much more effort it takes. And that is never lost on me. But the opportunities are there. I think it also takes different kinds of prioritizing and compromise at times to really get clear on what is most important. Is it most important to be in the US or to switch functions or make a bigger kind of career shift as your first step out of business school? Because that's going to have a big impact on how that you find the opportunities. Even within the US, is it most important that you're in a particular geography or that you're in a particular industry or function? And I think all of those questions are much more pressing for international students and much more important for people to get really clear how they prioritize them. And when they do ask themselves those questions, there are a lot of opportunities. It just takes some digging to find them. And it is not lost on me that digging, and my team spends a lot of time working with our international students, really holding their hand through that process and trying to navigate through it. But, I think my hope for the next 2 years, and especially we'll see what happens with the administration, who knows. I am very reluctant to be as optimistic as you, John. And I think that there is a lot, that will have a huge impact, though, on all of these questions. I really do believe that there is such a difference. I think the other thing that students really should be aware of is how, one of the industries that we always have a lot of students who are sponsored is consulting. And at the same time, most of the consulting firms are very open about wanting students to start in their native language and preferring that they start in their native language and then transferring to the US later, if that still is something that's possible. They still sponsor students to start directly in the US, but most of them don't particularly encourage it. And so I think a lot of it is also, what is the long-term plan? Is the long-term plan to be in the United States, or is it to get a few years of experience in the US? And depending on the answer to that question, how someone navigates really that first job search, especially as an international student, is going to be very different. And I think both sides have a lot of opportunities, but they just look different.
Yeah. For schools that have had STEM tracks or STEM certified MBAs altogether, the evidence there is very positive for internationals. Career management people have said they were able to get US companies more interested in them because of the additional OPT time. So clearly there's evidence that it works. And the fact that so many schools have now gotten STEM tracks in the last year in particular is evidence of the fact that it tends to work. But you do have to be placed in a STEM related job, right? Yeah. So there is that. So here's a question that I think is an interesting question, and I have my own personal views on this as well. But considering the job market, do you think a 2-year MBA is better than a 1-year MBA? Colette?
Yes, I do, almost unequivocally, because it's very difficult if you've got career switchers to change over your career without some experience in the field in which you want to go. So I would strongly recommend a 2-year MBA solely for that reason. We have a tremendous number of career switchers that we work with, and they're successful, but they get experience in their internship. We have applied strategy projects that require teams of students to work with an external company. We have something called Service Corps, where we match a student to a team of students to a nonprofit and then a consulting firm. It's lots and lots of experiential learning situations that I don't think are possible in a 1-year program.
Yeah, I'm assuming that everyone agrees. I mean, the internship, in some industries, an internship is pretty much mandatory because companies want to try you out. Investment banking, for sure. I know JP Morgan, they don't hire unless they intern you, period, for MBA jobs. And it's also good for the student because you're getting the chance to experience something, and you may in fact decide that something that you wanted, you don't want anymore. And I imagine that there's a certain percentage of your students who come back after their summer internships and tell you, you're going to hate me for telling you this, but I don't want to do consulting. Abby,
right.
don't you hear that conversation?
Absolutely, but we never say I hate you for it. I mean,
Right.
that's what it's for, right?
No,
It's,
they say
yes.
that to you
No, I know.
because they
But
think you're going to punish them.
Never. That's one of the great things about the summer. It's not just acquiring new skills, that it is an opportunity to really test an environment to see if it's the right place for you. I mean, I'm a big fan of the 2-year degree for all the reasons that Colette expressed. And in addition to the summer internship, it's just more time to dabble, right? All of our students are doing additional projects with companies during the school year. 2 years versus 1 year just gives you a lot more opportunity to do that. So I think it makes a big difference.
I also think to the extent that people put value on a alumni network, look, if you spend twice the amount of time with your classmates, you're going to bond more deeply and in a more enduring way than if you're in a program for 10 months or a year.
Yes.
It's just not possible. And incidentally, the compressed learning in that 1 year period also makes you so busy and it's so intense that you have less time to socialize and engage with your classmates. So that's another part of the equation.
You also get the benefit of the class above you and behind you. So
That's true too.
yeah. So there's
That's
that.
a really good point, actually, which I hadn't thought of. And that's a great benefit because in many cases, second years help to mentor first years and help guide them, including in their career process. So do any of you play a role in admissions? Because I know at some schools, not many, career management folks sit on the admissions committee. Now, do any of you play any of that kind of role in your admission decisions or not?
For certain programs, yes.
Yeah. So for the MBA, would you do that?
For parts of the MBA, yes.
Now, why parts? What parts would they be?
So I am on the Silver Scholars Admissions Committee, which is students who are applying directly out of undergrad. And the reason for that, as may seem apparent, is just because we want to make sure that we're setting them up for success. That program is students come from undergrad, they spend their year right after graduating from college as a first-year MBA, and then they are out of Yale for at least a year doing an extended internship to build their work experience, and then they come back for their second year of their MBA. And so we want to make sure that we're really accepting students who are going to be able to thrive in that kind of accelerated environment from the career perspective, as well as all the other perspectives.
Okay, and Abigail, I'm glad you mentioned Silver Scholar because the very first question that came in this session was about Silver Scholars, and this is it. How is COVID impacting admissions for the Silver Scholar program? And can you submit your Gmat or GRE after you apply? Because this person is worried that they can't take an at-home version.
I would direct the admissions specific questions to our admissions team because I don't want to get that answer wrong. But I know that people are submitting things after the rest of their application, but there's still other deadlines. So I would ask them directly to get the best answer for that. And they will be in our chat after. In terms of how it's affecting it, we've had robust applications to the Silver Scholars Program, as we always do. And so I think that it's, I'm not sure is the honest answer. I mean, I'm about to have all of the applications for this current round that I'm going to need to read soon. I may have more of an answer then because the last round that was really active was before a lot of this went into play. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I can say just from what we're seeing in terms of interest and volume, I think it's robust, and I think it's really interesting to see the broad array of students who are interested, and that's always the case with that program. So yes. It hasn't, I think that I can't say yet, but after the next round, I might have other things I would add.
So I don't know if anyone else has something to add about that original question, which is this: are you ever engaged in admission decisions?
Yes, we read admissions applications primarily to see if the career goals are realistic, and that's solely the reason why we look at those.
And we think of ourselves as a close partner. We sit together actually, and we travel together, but we're not formally part of the admissions committee.
Right. Well, you know, when someone has worked in the nonprofit field or is from the Peace Corps and they tell you they want to work in private equity, you know it ain't going to happen.
That's right.
All right. Well, believe it or not, our time is done. I want to really thank all of you
Thank
for a great session. Not only did we learn a lot, I think we had a lot of fun too. And
Great.
please, all of you
John.
stay safe, stay healthy, and with your families as well. Wish you the best.